Scott Horton is with us. He writes for harpers.org, contributing editor. He's also an attorney, adjunct professor at the Columbia Law School, and a former president of the International League for Human Rights. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Tom.
Great to have you with us. Tell us what's going on in Spain.
Well, it's a significant day. The prosecutors in Spain have adopted a criminal complaint against Alberto Gonzalez and 5 other senior Bush administration lawyers on the grounds that they engaged in a conspiracy to introduce torture at Guantanamo. And this comes out of an investigation that's been pending for some time into the treatment of 5 Spaniards who were held at Guantanamo,
right.
Who were actually being prosecuted. And in their defense in those criminal cases, they said we were tortured, and the Spanish Supreme Court upheld that and wouldn't allow evidence to be used against them. And that then initiated this criminal inquiry, which is targeting Alberto Gonzalez.
Right. And not only Alberto Gonzalez, but also Federal Appeals Court Judge and former Assistant Attorney General Jay Bybee, University of California law professor and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo, former Defense Department General Counsel and current Chevron lawyer William J. Haynes II, and Vice President Cheney's former Chief of Staff David Addington, and former Undersecretary of Defense Douglas Feith. And I think at least 3 of those people, no, 2 of those people anyway, have been guests on this show before. So these were the principal architects, presumably, of the torture policy. Is that the rationale here?
That's exactly right. 3 of them, of course, were at the Justice Department, and all of them are connected to this policy of torture.
And Alberto Gonzalez was the head of the Justice Department at the time, thus he gets dragged into this.
He was, and he's also, when he was general counsel, when he was president to the council, when he was counsel to the president, rather, in the White House, he commissioned the original torture memorandum that was written to him. Right.
Now, the Justice Department is, by definition of the Constitution, arguably, a division of the executive branch. The legislative branch, Article 1, makes the laws. The executive branch, Article 2, carries out the laws, executes the laws through agencies that are created by Congress for it to use. And so the real head of the Justice Department was not Alberto Gonzalez. It was George W. Bush. Do you suspect, first of all, correct me if I'm constitutionally wrong on that, Scott Horton, and if not, then could this be a precursor to something much larger coming down the road?
Yeah, well, the argument you make is this is exactly the way our friends in the Federalist Society see it with their view of the unitary executive. They view the president at the top and the senior law enforcement officer of the country, and I would say that is not an interpretation to scoff about.
Yeah, let me separate myself from the Federalist Society. They see the unitary executive theory is that he has a power that exceeds that, basically, of both the Supreme Court and the legislature. Correct me again if I'm wrong, and basically places him as a sovereign. And I'm just suggesting he's the head of the executive branch, or do I have it wrong?
No, he is the head of the executive branch, and his views will overcome those of any other officer, including the Attorney General, if they're inconsistent.
But look at when Nixon didn't like what his Attorney General was doing. What was it, Elliot? I'm forgetting names now.
Elliot Richardson.
Elliot Richardson. Thank you very much.
Right.
He said you've got to do X, Y, Z, and you got to help cover up Watergate. Richardson said no, ain't going to do it, and quit.
That's right, and that's the duty of a lawyer to exercise independent professional judgment.
But the point is that Nixon was asserting that he was the guy who was in charge of the Justice Department because it fell under the purview of the executive branch. So this isn't this unitary executive or whatever. I mean, that was. I'm not even sure the Federalist Society was in existence at that time. It's a relatively new creation in the last 30, 40 years, isn't it?
Yeah, the notion of unitary executive can be stretched back to the beginning of the Republic, but what we're seeing now is a sort of virulent manifestation of it.
Yeah. So 2 questions then out of this. We're talking with Scott Horton, contributing editor of Harper's Magazine, attorney, adjunct professor of law at the Columbia Law School, and former president of the International League of Human Rights. Number 1 is the prosecution of these guys who all worked in the executive department, the executive branch of government, could that then lead to a prosecution of George W. Bush? And might that be for, this is an interesting one. Might that be why Dick Cheney was asserting that he wasn't part of the executive branch, that he was part of the legislative branch during his vice presidency, because the vice presidency is mentioned in Article 1 of the Constitution. So he was, in advance trying to separate himself from the possibility of prosecution for these things.
Well, to me, it's quite challenging to get inside the mind of Dick Cheney.
Yes.
But I'll take on the first question.
Yeah.
I'll just put in the context of what's going on in Spain right now. I mean, when I interviewed some of the Spanish lawyers and prosecutors who are looking at this right now, I put that question to them. I mean, what about Bush? He's stated openly that he accepts responsibility for this and that he made the final decisions.
Right.
And what I hear from the Spaniards is that no, that's head of state. That raises a head of state immunity question, and we're just not going to go there. So I think you see, they went after the lawyers, because the lawyers don't have that legal doctrine standing between them and a foreign prosecutor.
But Spain is still, again, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that Spain is still a kingdom, are they not, or did they abolish the aristocracy there?
Yeah, they're a constitutional monarchy.
Right. So
the king is. They're very much like England.
Right. They've separated the functions of head of state and head of government, but therefore, the doctrine of sovereign immunity in Spain means something very different than it does here in the United States, doesn't it?
Right, but their major concern is a foreign sovereign. So their courts generally will not deal with a foreign sovereign in any way, including generally a foreign sovereign. Although, of course, they did launch their case against Pinochet, which was an extraordinary. Who was
the sovereign, and in
right.
the United States, isn't the sovereign in the United States the first three words of the Constitution? The group that got together to create the Constitution, we the people, aren't we the sovereign?
That's right. In fact, I wrote that this week, talking about the Obama administration's invocation of the notion of sovereign immunity. I pointed out that, yes, they seem to have forgotten that sovereign is the people in the United States, not the president and the executive branch.
How could a constitutional law professor like Barack Obama forget that? What's going on in the Justice Department here, Scott Horton?
I think that there is a strong desire to just move on and not focus on these problems from the Bush years.
But they're not just moving on. I mean, Bush was not invoking sovereign immunity.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, I think that the filings in the series of court cases where they're using sovereign immunity and they're using state secrets doctrine to block the prosecution of litigations, to me, is just baffling, because Barack Obama, as a senator and as a presidential candidate, gave us a very clear signal he would not do this, and now he's out there doing it. So,
could it be that there are Democrats to be embarrassed? I'm sorry, we have a half a minute left here. And therefore he's getting pressure from within his own party?
I think it has more to do with people in the CIA who don't want their dirt exposed to the public, and his sense that he needs these people to help him with his intelligence.
But is that worth blowing up the Constitution over?
Not in my view.
Yeah, not in mine either. But of course, neither one of us are president of the United States. Wow, some very, very large issues here. Scott, just in a word, do you think that the Spanish prosecution, is going to go forward with any success?
I think it seems quite likely. In fact, I've not seen another case in the last 10 years that has anything like the prospects of this one. In fact, the prosecutors are all looking for Thursday the release of more documents from the Justice Department, which they think is going to make out their case.
From your lips to God's ears. Scott Horton, harpers.org. Scott, thank you.
Okay, great to be with you.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.